We're ready.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. It is 9:05, and I'll call to order the June meeting of the Weston Board of Education Policy Committee. Let's take a look at the agenda, which I have right here. Okay, let's start with the approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Does anyone have any revisions or modifications? No? Okay.
No.
I don't either. Steve, do you have anything?
No, I don't.
Okay, great. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? All right, thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Steve, a second?
Second.
Okay, great. All in favor, we can just raise our hands. Aye. Yep.
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes pass. Thank you for that. And then our agenda item today is just the single policy that we started talking about last month on attendance and excuses, it says, which I think is 5113. And if you recall, committee, we had various policies that touch on attendance and truancy that weren't ordered consecutively or in some cases were, but weren't consolidated properly. So what we tasked the administration to do was just to try to put it all in one place so that it made sense and wasn't repetitive. And I think Dr. Henkel did that. So do you want to talk to us about that, Dr. Henkel, what you did, kind of walk us through it? And
I would love to. I tried. So looking for some feedback on this. It definitely was a very long policy.
Yeah.
So as Melissa mentioned, last month, we had about 3 policies that were discussing attendance, truancy, and or chronic absenteeism. There is guidance from Shipman and Goodwin relative to these policies. And so we leveraged that policy as an anchor for merging all other conversation and content into that policy. So what you're seeing right now is the foundation of the policy from Shipman and Goodwin, which is the merged version of 5113. Then I took all other policies that were currently in existence, such as 5113.2 was one of them. And I believe there was another one. Oh, that used to be just 5113. And so I've looked for redundant content as well as new language that needed to be merged into our new policy. So do you want to go page by page?
I mean, I recognize it's a little bit long. I think we can I think it's probably worth going page by page or just at least going in that order.
Sure.
There may be pages where we don't have anything to discuss.
The first 3 pages are the policy specifically. The Shipman and Goodwin first paragraph is noted as it stands. We just revised to be Weston Board of Education. I then took the 3 next paragraphs in blue that were from our former policy, and I made a comment there that that's where that came from.
Yep.
The third paragraph that starts with the word therefore.
Yep.
Is a question that I have regarding redundancy and whether or not it's necessary, given that we have outlined some of the information around verification of absences and written documentation within the regulations. And I'm not sure if it's required to be part of the policy. This is specifically talking about that all students are committed to attending all class periods. They shouldn't be tardy. We are going to require that there's accurate records of attendance, which includes absenteeism as well as tardies, and that all absences must be verified.
Yeah. I don't mind it being here. I think it gives a little bit of context and kind of an overall approach to the policy. Like, I think it's helpful.
I agree with that, Melissa.
Okay, good. There are other sections that you flag later in the policy, Tina, where I
Mhm.
think it is appropriate maybe to move it to the handbook or something like that, when it's just, you know, a little bit more explanation than might be needed for a policy. But
Okay.
no, I think this one provides relevant context, but I don't know if the committee feels differently.
I'm fine with that paragraph. I think that it actually does add context for what is in the rest of the policy without being overly redundant.
Right.
I did find it seemed redundant to me in the second paragraph that's highlighted in blue, what the Connecticut state law requires. There's two sentences. The Board of Education recognizes that learning in the classroom is an integral and essential part of the student's total learning process. Learning experiences that occur in the classroom are considered to be meaningful and essential components of the learning process. Those seem somewhat redundant to me. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could kill the first sentence, a student's enrollment in a course is his or her commitment. Because we are talking about the reasons and the verification, I think, that we haven't mentioned before.
That's in a different paragraph though, correct?
Yeah.
Are we talking about two separate paragraphs?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you talking about paragraph 3 being redundant with paragraph 4, or are you talking about paragraph 3 being redundant internally with itself?
No, I'm talking about inside paragraph 3. So
Okay.
overall paragraph 3, paragraph 2 that's highlighted blue. Within that paragraph, there's two sentences that seem to be redundant.
Oh yeah. Okay, fair enough.
So, did you say something, Steve?
No, I was agreeing with you.
So
there's like
Sharon,
two run-on-
would you recommend the sentence that starts with learning experiences that occur? Maybe take that one out and leave the Board of Education recognizes that learning is learning.
One or the other. If this is
The
meant to
second.
sound like, you say the second is one we should leave in, Steve?
No, take out.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we'll remove that. And that is the policy as it stands, and I've updated some of the general statutes and the names that are attached to the numbers that I knew existed. That was emerged from the previous policy as well.
Okay.
So that's it
Okay.
for the policy part. It's the regs where now the meat and potatoes start to attach to
Yep.
this policy.
Yep.
So you'll notice that within the regs, this is where we define a lot of the terms. Many of these terms have been updated since the last iteration of these policies being written. The law has been updated relative to excused and unexcused absences. And you'll note in my comments that some of the old policy either not warranted right now because the law has been updated, or it's redundant because we've defined it in this section. Am I the one getting the background noise?
No, I'm getting it too. It's like a buzz.
You're getting it also?
Yeah, it's very low.
I'm not getting it.
No?
Neither
So
am
I'm
I.
getting like a click or something in my ear. Okay.
No.
I'm just getting a buzz here. Don't know
All
why.
right. Okay, so for example, you'll see that the excused absence definition, there was a definition of an excused absence in the previous 5113 policy. It actually was not accurate any longer because of the updated law. And so I didn't bring it over because this is the new law on what is defined as an excused absence.
Okay.
I find this to be interesting, and this is just a little bit of a sidebar, but something that is still related to excused absence. In the absenteeism hotline that we have set up for the district,
Yeah.
nowhere does it say that you're by calling your student out or saying that you need to then have a written notification when the student returns to school. It doesn't say that in the hotline, in the voicemail. And if that's going to be our policy, that whenever a parent calls a child out, within the first 9 days of being absent, if a parent wants it to be an excused absence as opposed to an unexcused absence, say, for example, your child is sick, there needs to be some sort of notification that just calling your child out to the hotline is not going to be sufficient, that they need to send some note in with the child when they return to school.
The note doesn't have to be a physical note. It's communication. So an email that says your child is out and why is sufficient for documentation.
So but again, just calling the hotline is not sufficient, is what I'm saying. And I think a lot of parents are under the impression that just
Yeah.
calling the hotline is sufficient
I
notification.
thought it was.
I did too. And it wasn't until I was reading this that I was like, oh my goodness, all these
Yeah.
times.
Now I know why Will has unexcused absences.
We can certainly make a note of that. We can make sure that the messages are like that and that it specifies in the handbook.
Yeah, either. And also on the message, if we're going to make that change, which I would highly recommend, in the message, there should be here's an email address to send the email to, because most of the people are going to communicate via email for those messages, as opposed to sitting down and writing out the note
Yeah.
and pinning it to their child's shirt the next day they go back to school. So,
Sharon, is the message that they get generic for all 4 schools, or is it separate for all 4 schools?
It's
I don't
separate
know.
because each school has their own attendance line, so it's what they say. But in terms of an email address, you probably want to have a dedicated email, because it's not good to email the attendance person in the event that they're not in that day. They won't get the message.
Yeah, so
Correct.
can you make a note of that, Jody, and we can work on a script that can be read and then an email for each school, and then we can add that also to our communication protocol.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Because in
Thanks.
some of the schools, you have to have a note to pick your child up, but at the high school, it's a lot different. So then I think people just made that assumption.
Right.
Okay, I think that's a good change. And the other, on the same point, I had a question in reading this that I didn't know the answer to. So let's see if we think it's something other people may have a question about. So I was wondering how do you determine, how is the half of the school day determined in the middle school, but probably most importantly at the high school? Is it when you're
It's defined.
calculating, is it the total minutes of time, or are you looking at individual class periods? Because it seems to me that you might have classes at the end of the day that have more absences than periods that fall in the beginning of the day.
It's defined within the policy. We defined it. Do you know what page it is
Yeah.
on?
No, but it wasn't clear to me. I see where you've defined absence.
We edited it yesterday, didn't we, Tina?
Yeah,
Did
it was
not?
4 classes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Classes in either building
Right.
is a half a day.
Mhm.
4 classes. So, okay. So that's helpful to know. So the question then I have is, so what happens if a student is missing, if all their absences are for, let's just say like orthodontics or going to sporting events where they're leaving school at the end of the day and it's falling disproportionately. So let's say you have English 9th period or whatever the period system is in high school, then you're missing that class and you may have reached your 9 absences, but maybe, your first period class, your second period class, you have math and science, and you haven't missed that because you're just leaving for sports or orthodontics. Are you now absent for that one period of class in a way that's different from the morning classes where you're there longer?
No.
Time is time.
Yeah, it's not locked in the last period. It rotates through. There is an afternoon rotation. So yes, some are hit more, but if it's a sports reason, that's completely different than an orthodontic reason. Gina, I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, time is time. It doesn't matter when that time is, but to Lisa's point, you're asking about missing classes of the same classes all the time, and at the high school it rotates, so you're not.
Okay.
I mean, the probability of hitting them all at the same time is highly unlikely.
Okay. Then what
Yeah.
about at the middle school where it probably doesn't change, I don't think. So could
Not as
somebody
much.
trigger this absentee policy for missing a lot of their 8th and 9th period classes? Or is it only triggered if they're absent the 4 periods of the day that qualifies as an absence? So, you know what I mean?
It doesn't matter if the absences are the morning or the afternoon. It's total time of that day
Okay.
to determine if you are awarded credit for that day. And
It's also, keep in mind also that what we talked about with like sports in the high school, leaving early, that never happens in middle school. There are no sports in middle school. So
Okay.
that's not going to be as much of an issue as it would be in high school.
Okay. All
and
right.
part of these regulations as well, because we have a district attendance committee and we're having our final meeting this week, is that there is a level of communication that we've been working on this school year to really be proactive before those 10 days when
Yeah.
truancy may start to hit. as far as verbal communication prior to those 10 days, written communication prior to those 10 days. You'll see the documentation in the back of
did.
this policy.
Yeah.
And that's new based on our commitment to this work this school year. And then what are some of the interventions in place if needed, if there is those common patterns around missing school during the same classes at the same time for whatever reason?
Yeah, because that's where I was going with this. Is obviously this may not trigger our absence policy in terms of the the state 10 days or not 10 days if you're just missing one period, but then it may trigger the chronic absenteeism rates. Those are calculated based on subject class periods or times, correct?
It will impact.
Yeah,
all
and
of
that's
these
what's bad for the next gen, right?
absenteeism. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because for the state reasons, loss of instructional time for whatever reason, this is the part that we all struggle with, even as a parent myself and as a district admin, when we look at some of these scores, relative to the next generation accountability system, is that if you're out of school, you've lost instructional time.
Exactly.
They don't care why, really.
Yeah.
So you're absent, you're absent. And so when they look at the number of absences, it's both excused or unexcused.
Yeah, and that's what's in the report. That
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's a shift in thinking that we have to work on. I think in the district, because I do
Absolutely.
think people think because it's an orthodontist or because it's this or because it's that you have the right to miss school, and these things are obviously very important for the students. They're very important for the teachers and the continuity of education and keeping the class in the same pace. But it's also important for our the reports that we're going to be scored on with the state now. Okay. All right. So we're all on the same page.
Yep.
All right. So that was my question.
So we'll work on that this week. That'll be on my to-do with the team around written documentation, and I'll work with Lisa and Jody, obviously, about the attendance lines too. So we're consistent.
Yeah.
We should be now on page 5. There are no edits to this based on the Shipman policy.
I had no idea that we had an active duty member of the Armed Forces policy in there. It's actually quite nice.
Yeah, it is. I thought the same thing.
Page 6, how we are defining school days in there in attendance. That's a definition that we've merged over that maybe Shipman and Goodwin didn't have, but we had in the previous policy. I've made sure that we are defining us as a district in here, and it's not generic. Unexcused absences. The definition of an unexcused absence is also noted there. That came from 5113.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's good. It's including virtual, which is important.
Yeah.
It was an updated language based on Shipman and Goodwin. I left it there. In our previous policy, we talked about unexcused absences, but it was no longer relevant.
Yep.
Outdated. We've added the mental health wellness days in here, which are new, as many of you know.
Yep.
So that's the bottom there of page 6. Goes on to page 7. For mental health wellness days, just to make sure everybody is aware, there are guidelines around those mental health days. You cannot take them consecutively. They cannot be wrapped around a long holiday weekend. So they truly are supposed to be for a child's mental health. And typically what happens in these situations when they are requested, even now, it is followed up with intervention and support to follow up with counseling and any other needs that the child may need as to why they're taking those days. So it's not just, here's the code for the day. It really is a conversation, making sure that we're responsive when those students are actually using those days.
And
How are we? Oh, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
why can't they be taken consecutively?
The state law discusses the fact that these should not, there's guidelines around them. I'm not actually exactly sure why it can't be 2 consecutive. I think it's in part because some of the conversation has been whether or not students are truly taking these for mental health days, or are they being taken or abused for other reasons?
Oh, you mean like senior skip day, when all the parents called them out for mental health and then got upset when we disciplined them for certain things?
Yes, maybe that's it.
Yeah. You know, my feeling is let them cut and let them own it. Right?
Yeah. If it's skip day, it's skip day.
And,
Yeah.
But
and
don't argue with us when you're and then using stress and that stuff as a camouflage for what you really want. So sorry, that was
and
very
just
annoying.
to add, these are still absences.
Yep.
And they still count towards our absenteeism rate. The next
Okay.
section is about written documentation for absences.
I actually have a question on number 1.
Yeah.
In this area in particular, for written documentation, consecutive days of absence are considered one incidence of absence. That is strictly for the written, meaning you only need one written note for all those days. But each of those days individually counts as
Right.
an absent day.
Correct.
Yeah, that just seemed a little, I think we need to clarify that line, because when I was reading through it, I was like, what? Hold on. So if a kid is out sick for 4 days, that's considered to be one absence. So I think we need to, consecutive days of absence is considered one incidence of absence for the purpose of for the purpose of a written documentation.
Are you in C1?
C1, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm adding it now. Okay. Good catch. So some of this is also like number 2, C2, about the 9 days. You'll see that there is a written notification that we as a district are providing to parents regarding those 9 days, and what type of written documentation is needed up to those first 9 days. So there's a layer of communication there. And then on the 10th day, we have the documentation changes basically.
Mm-hmm.
Student illness,
And
holidays.
when are we sending, what triggers our notice to the parents when we start sending the letters that you so nicely included in the back of this policy? Like,
Yeah.
is there a numerical cutoff that we start notifying them, or is it facts and
It's-
circumstances?
It's you, from what I understand, I'm going to refine this week, but from what I understand, we're all submitting using that letter when it hits day 5.
Okay.
Day
Um,
5.
I think it's day 5 that we trigger that,
Yeah.
Okay.
because we want them to know, like, you're approaching
Yep.
this number.
Yep.
And our
Agreed.
principals have already been communicating using this information, but I think we're just trying to be more consistent.
Okay.
And it does provide a total number of absences as they're accumulated on that report, and it's generated out of PowerSchool. So you'll see that throughout this policy and regulations, a lot of the documentation internally that we're using is through our PowerSchool database, and that includes when we're sending communication, who's received that communication, and also the documentation regarding verbal communication as well.
Okay. Great.
Student illness,
Mm-hmm.
assigned note from a medical professional who may be the school nurse who's evaluated the student, confirming the absence and giving an expected return date. I guess for me, that kind of sits a little strange, like, in as far as the school nurse
Mhm.
might be the one. I mean, I don't know. My thought process is, okay, when is a school nurse note going to be working? And obviously it's when the child is sent home from school and the school nurse has seen him or her before they send them home. But this is also for a child who's missed quite a bit of school. So
Not necessarily. I mean, I wonder if this evolved out of COVID.
yeah, because
Because
at that stage, the
like
nurse can say they can't come back for a certain
confirming that
period
they
of time.
don't have COVID and they needed to submit a negative COVID test.
Okay.
This is not language from us. This is language from Shipman. So
I just
Maybe-
want to make sure parents aren't sending their kids into school not feeling well so that they can get a signed note from the nurse as opposed to having to drive them to the doctor. We don't need
Yeah,
sick
no,
kids
she-
coming to school.
She wouldn't do that. I think it really is when the nurse has communication with, it's two is more
Yeah.
the thing. I think it's just in there in the rare occurrence that happens, but they don't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
there's always conversation, so that's what it talks about.
Okay.
I think it's fine.
All right. Okay. I don't want to read too much into it then.
Yeah.
No, but your point's well taken. I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so moving on, those are 3. We went A, B, C. Moving on to D, E, and F,
Actually, oh,
right?
okay. Yeah.
Just more reasons for absences.
Yep.
The extraordinary educational opportunity is further clarified as we continue on, and there's actual documentation and a letter that they have to submit if somebody's requesting an educational opportunity that we have to document.
Yep.
Oh, look at that.
What's
Look at
that? Which number?
Number 4. So that's only for extraordinary neither email nor text message shall serve to satisfy the requirement of written documentation.
So that's where, yeah, in that area it says that they have to write a letter, sign it, scan it, email it. Then in an exception being in rare and extraordinary circumstances.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, like we accept emails as document, like written reasons as to why they're absent.
But this is saying
Yeah,
it's
for,
just a regular email is not going to work. It has to
Right.
be a scanned document with the signature by the sounds of it.
but this is for the 10th absence though. This is
Yeah.
not
Okay.
up for days 1 to 9.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because now once you hit the 10-day mark, you're now in a different zone. You're
Yeah.
now, beyond the truancy number.
Yeah, I think they just want the doctor's signature. They don't want an email.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
6 is about absence of documentation. And that having administrative authority to ask for more thorough documentation if it's weak. And the amount of time that parents have in order to submit further clarification or documentation if the principal's requesting it. So they get up to 5 school days to do that.
Sorry.
I think you have visitors. Okay, anything on that section? Because now we go into the extraordinary educational opportunities.
Are you all good, Coco?
All right, so D moves on to the extraordinary educational opportunities. This is by nature if there's an educational opportunity where the child will be out for a period of time, like if they're actually going somewhere that would warrant some type of experience that aligns to their coursework or plan of study, not a vacation, but it's directly aligned to maybe like an exchange program that we have, that they wouldn't be physically here, but they are considered receiving instruction or an educational opportunity. There is a form that they have to fill out, and we have to approve on whether or not we determine if that is considered an extraordinary educational opportunity. And within number 2, we talk about that family vacations does not qualify as an extraordinary educational opportunity. So if they go to Rome or Paris just on a vacation, that's not considered an extraordinary educational opportunity if it's during the school year.
Yeah, with these 2 paragraphs on family vacations, I mean, I think this is great language. It explains the rationale behind it, and it's a good defensive posture. Where did that come from, a policy, or where did that come from originally? I'd be inclined from where?
The educational, these extraordinary educational opportunities have been part of the policies for many years.
Yeah.
I think the clarity around defining what those mean has been upped. And
Yeah.
there's a couple lines in here that I've removed because there are, in some previous policies and examples, there's penalties associated with going on family vacations during the school year, that you've seen, we've kind of crossed out some of that language here. But we've added in pieces where, like, if a child is going on a vacation, and we're notified about it, it doesn't require the classroom teacher to compensate for the instructional lost time.
Well, that's an important point. I was just wondering whether, sub Roman A and B are better in the handbook, and just leaving it. Is it more powerful and impactful if it just says, 2, family vacations do not qualify as extraordinary educational opportunities?
I think it should be both. And I know that the building administrators are very supportive of having it within the regulations, which then transcends into their handbook.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's very powerful to be able to say, well, this is the handbook. Yes, it's also in the board policy.
Right.
Let me send you the link. I think it really clarifies and emphasizes, but it also acknowledges that there are situations, I can think of many, that we waive because of the educational component, the absence. So.
Yes, and if you go to the next page, number 3, that is what Lisa's talking about, that we do have the authority to approve educational opportunities that we deem as aligned to the educational program in Weston. There has to be signatures and time to review that request, and that's outlined in number 3.
Okay.
And number 4, because it goes from superintendent and as well as the building principal. And it's all part of the form, right? So the form that's at the end, the appendix of this, it's just basically delineating the information within that form.
Got it. Okay. Well, you guys tell me if the language is helpful here, then by all means,
Yeah, it is.
we'll leave it. Okay.
And that's K-12 feedback. It's not just high school feedback. It's also at the elementary level as well.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, a week-long absence for anything, no matter how educational it is, has an impact in the classroom. Right now, there's a student that's behind, and in those elementary grades where you've got teachers that are trying to move the whole class ahead, and somebody's not there, it's disruptive, certainly. Okay. All right.
So 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all part of the extraordinary educational opportunities.
Okay. Got it.
Section E is actually good point here. So remember how the last time we met, we have one other policy that will need to go for approval, which is 5112, which outlines ages of attendance. Children between the ages of 5 years old and up to 7, language requiring students to attend school are not required up to age 7, but we are required to document that we have children that are not coming to school up to age 7 if we are aware of that. So this section up to number 5 has pieces of that policy in it. So number 1 and number 2, no, number 1, I'm sorry. Number 1 is about a student 5 or 6. Talks about age as well as truancy in this section. So I just want to make sure that this is a good time to ask the question, basically. The 5112, we reviewed it last time. It still needs to get approved though, correct, Jody?
We didn't even do a first read on that, did we?
Yeah,
No.
last time I brought it
No,
forward.
no, not this one. There was confusion here as to whether we were going to bring it back or whether it was going to go to the board. But I think after you and I spoke this morning, we're just going to bring this to the board. We're not going to have to revisit it again now.
For the first read?
The next
Okay.
meeting, we'll bring it to the board.
I have a question on it, and that is, and perhaps this is covered in what's going to be part of the first read for the other policy, but the student 5 or 6 years of age shall be considered truant. So if, for example, if you have a 5-year-old or a child who's turning 5 in, say, November, you need to submit a letter to the school district saying you're not going to start your child until the following year?
Yes, there is a letter that is basically saying not entering your child into the public school.
And
You
is
know,
there any,
Do that
so
up
if
to
you,
age 7.
so if you do not submit that letter for a child, say you're holding them back to start kindergarten, they're putting them in a 4-5s program elsewhere. If you don't submit that letter, is there any sort of penalty or ramification for that?
I mean, it was a question for us because sometimes, like, we don't know who they are.
Right. Like I did that with my son specifically. He's a
Mhm.
November baby, and I didn't start him until he was 5.
Me too. William was
So,
5 too.
but I never submitted any paperwork. I didn't even realize that was necessary.
No, I think it's more of a child find issue. So we have basically by law is if we are aware of a child up to 7 years old that should be enrolled in the public school, that we have a response to that, and there is a requirement to communicate to the parents and a letter with signatures notifying the district that they're basically refusing them to come to school.
Okay. And
Which
then
almost reminds me also of if a parent wants to withdraw a student because they want to homeschool them,
correct.
right? We are aware this child is here. Now they're basically coming out of the public school, and what are they doing with them? There is a document that we need to make sure we know where they are. On the flip side, even though they never enrolled technically, if we're aware of who they are and they're doing something different for that time frame, it's our responsibility to reach out and find out what they are doing so that we can track them up to age 7 if there is any neglect after that point.
Okay. Should we include that in the truancy as far as the removing your child from? Because there's one that says a student 17 years of age, and one that says a student 18 years of age, but it doesn't say anything about removing your child from the school district will not result in truancy if you are homeschooling, but you need to file X paperwork. Do we need to put that in here at all?
So this policy, 5112, is the one where it talks about ages of attendance. It includes, I'm not sure if it includes withdrawal for a reason for either homeschooling or for alternate. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Alternate school program or suitable educational program if he or she cannot acquire a sufficient number of credits. That's that. Voluntarily terminated enrollment. I believe it's in this one that would trigger it would trigger the documentation from the district between the district and the parent.
Okay. All right. That I wanted to check on. And the other thing is, and this may be in the policy that you're reading now, and my apologies, I missed the last policy meeting, so I was not part of the conversation. If you find a student that enters the school system, say at 7 years old, do they automatically, are the parents, how do you determine where to start the child?
Yeah, we do like assessment screenings and we do small group conversations. We would then institute a lot of our universal screeners for reading and for math to see where they are relative to a specific grade level.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically in the United States, right? A grade many times is determined by the age that you are, and that's where we would start.
Correct. Okay.
Some variance, right? That's how typically in the United States, that's how we identify grade levels based on grade.
And if a parent chooses to homeschool their child, do we have any obligation to that child?
Nope. If you withdraw your child, because I've done it, right? If you would withdraw your child to homeschool, there is documentation that basically asks for why are you doing that and where will they be attending school and for what purposes. But then once they're withdrawn, the public school is not obligated to provide any education or tracking or after that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So truancy, this is defined by the law. This is not any language that has been merged. This is updated based on Shipman and Goodwin's policy for E1 through 5. F is about the voluntary withdrawal. G is about definitions of attendance, whether a student is in attendance relative to suspension or expulsion. And we try to keep students in school, from what I understand, Lisa, correct here as well. so that we can provide an educational opportunity for them, even during discipline reasons. We don't want them to be removed from the environment. That's not really a positive response. We talk about homebound instruction. If there is an opportunity to provide homebound instruction for students, regardless of the reason, it is still considered instruction, especially if we are coordinating homebound instruction. So that's outlined there, as well as they are considered to be in attendance. There are procedures for students regarding notification of just whether or not they're in school or not. That's section H, excuse me, and notification of 1 and 2, and basically how we're monitoring that attendance, making sure that they're in school, and how we're tracking that data. And as I mentioned before, in the past, many of the, the Shipman policies provided documentation for districts if they did not have a digital platform. We have a digital platform, therefore we do not need to track or monitor this data by hand. It is done electronically through PowerSchool. I think there's a typo in number 2. Number 1B. It should be K-12, not K-8.
I think I might be on the wrong 1B.
H, 1B.
H. Oh, okay. Got it. I went down. Yeah, K-12.
Yep. Missed that
Yeah,
one.
it's K-12.
Here we talk about, so the district attendance committee, we tried to be as clear around how we monitor in Weston. Some of this language in here was very generic from Shipman and Goodwin. So we cleaned up some of that language in here around how we communicate with parents, either through PowerSchool, through phone calls, and then also with the letters that we send home, and making sure that we notate that we've, in multiple attempts, to contact the parents, because sometimes if they don't pick up the phone, what does that mean and where do we track that? And then how do we confirm that we've sent notification through PowerSchool, and how do we ensure that they've read that communication and that that communication loop has been completed? So that's an update there based on that conversation. The next section talks about co-curricular activities and absences and participation, and how that relates to students being absent from school, and whether or not they get to continue to participate in those co-curricular activities, which they do not if they are absent if they're considered absent for the day based on those 4 full classes.
Yeah, mine still says 3, so we're changing that, correct?
Okay, so it should be updated on the digital version of it. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, because I have it updated here.
Okay, so 3, number 3, there must say 4, Jody. I think mine was printed before we met yesterday.
Yeah, Jody, you shouldn't touch it. I have it updated here.
These were the conversations that took place between you and Tina yesterday.
Yeah, okay, so just to make sure it is 4. And
Yep.
4 full periods works at both schools.
Yep. I have that. Okay, the next section is about intervention. So we talk a lot about like what happens internally if there are students that are truant, and if they're regularly, the patterns of behavior around attendance are persistent. So that next section is about intervention and how we will support and create measures to support the family to try to ensure that the student is coming to school more consistently. These are things that are already in place, or that we have systems already in place that align to these regulations outlined by the Shipman and Goodwin. We do have school-based teams that meet regularly to review the data and provide collaborative conversations around intervention and assistance. And we do follow through with the PBT process if it warrants for individual students and depending on that data and those conversations. We do have family and service needs written in here as well as part of our intervention process if a student and his or her family needs additional support. That's highlighted in yellow if you keep going down.
Mhm.
And all of this conversation and intervention procedures are documented.
Right. And that's new, the attendance records, right? The way that we're
Yep,
doing that.
so, yep, attendance records, those are merged over and updated. As I mentioned before, we are using PowerSchool as our way of maintaining those records, which are then reported to the state. So we have this work around the attendance committee in the district has been in collaboration with IT, just to
Yep.
make sure that all of our systems between PowerSchool and the state are in sync, and that the IT staff also is aware of these updates and policies, so that they have just some background knowledge around this policy, so that if they see data that seems like a red flag, they know who to ask, and they don't just send it along. The next section outlines chronic absenteeism. There's more definitions here. Again, this is from Shipman and Goodwin and the updated law. And the definition of chronic absenteeism as well as there, and what may trigger some of those internal attendance review teams. We've already defined that we have school-based teams that review this data and looks at chronic absenteeism and how we respond to them.
And who is on that team?
Typically, it's a social worker, counselor, building administrator. Sometimes it's even an academic interventionist, building principal. It varies most of the time as the kids get older. Sometimes that team expands and gets a little broader. Yeah, but there's representation, not just academically, but also socially, social emotionally too, basically through the school counseling department. So we're basically at the end here where we're looking at data and how that data is reported to the state. And as I mentioned before, because we use PowerSchool, making sure that these reports are accurate in PowerSchool is critical. I know this is not part of the regulations, but part of the work that we did behind the scenes this school year was we worked with IT and the building administrators to review all of our codes they're consistent K-12, and that we're all using them the same way. So this policy will now be in sync with those codes and making sure that there's a more consistent process on how we use those codes and how we enter them into PowerSchool. So we're all doing the same thing.
Okay.
Have we ever gotten to the point where absenteeism is a concern?
As a
Concern in
district?
terms of having to report the concern? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you ask that question that way. So when we look at our state accountability number,
Right.
it is on the higher side when we report it to the state, our chronic absenteeism indicator. It's indicator 4 for us internally, right? Because if you get up to 30% or higher, it's a red flag with the state. We haven't hit 30%, but I can't remember the number off the top of my head. But when we did the curriculum committee meeting, we talked about the next generation accountability system. And that was one of the conversations, was that indicator. And so part of the issue is that number, though, is counted regarding any reason that someone is not in school. So the vacations, those mental health days, unexcused, excused absences, all of that contributes to that number. And so we as a team, we're trying to have further conversations around how do we make parents aware of how those data points are reported, and whether or not it can be reduced if, doctor's appointments, or if there's other appointments that can be scheduled beyond the school day so that it doesn't necessarily show that we have this high level of absenteeism in Weston.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have now that we're being scored and rated this way, because I do think
Right.
that the average parent is thinking that an excused absence is fine, right? And I do think it needs to be a conversation we have in conjunction with athletics, because I think there are situations where if you have doctor's appointments and things, that students are reluctant to schedule those after school, right? At the 2:33, 3:30 timeframe. Because I mean, I think when you have the younger children, those are the appointments that you typically make. But now you have sports where coaches, whether affiliated with the high school or with just private programming, are telling students that that they can't miss these practices. So now you've got kids who are saying, well, I can't miss my practice after school, but I could miss my Spanish class, right? I'm up to date on Spanish, so I could miss that. Or I can miss my PE class, right? And if you're missing PE class, that's still counting as an absence for our rating. So I do think it needs to be a larger kind of conversation about how the district feels, about absenteeism and the importance of being in school and academics over athletics in this regard.
You know what, Melissa, I don't disagree with you on that, but I have a question as to, I mean, how is it that Weston is at the high end? I don't really see us as a district as being all that different from, say a Westport or, the other Durgay schools. Why is it that, how is it that our chronic absenteeism would be at the higher end? Are they recording their absences differently than we are, which would have a better reflection on them than does us? For example, if a student misses a class because they're going to, the ski team leaves school and they miss the last 2 classes of the day whenever they have a race. Is that just not being counted, or how? I'm curious as to why we're having a chronic absenteeism on the higher end, and why, what is it that we're doing differently?
It's a good question. When we were at the curriculum committee, we had the 4 representatives from the district attendance committee and the principals on to talk about some of the variants around attendance and the reasons why kids are absent for whatever reason. It definitely varied at the different levels as to reasons. The theme, a lot of the theme was relative to vacations.
Okay.
Absent due to vacations.
I think it would be very interesting
always to sports. That wasn't the messaging that I was hearing.
I think it'd be interesting to see the breakdown building by building on this a little bit. Yep. And I wonder if it's worth, maybe this is something Lisa and Steve, we can talk about at a chair meeting, but I almost wonder if this is something that's worth coming to the full board, just an update at one of our monthly meetings on attendance. We can explain that now this is being scored differently. It's going into our next gen reports. It's a change. And use that as an opportunity to educate the public and the students on the importance of attendance.
Yeah.
I guess,
Melissa, can you add, Dodie, maybe if we do it in October, if we can't do it in September, to go over it, because I do think that we got to look at the data, because sometimes you think something's happening at the high school, for example, and I can give you 4 concrete examples of being in Hurlburt Elementary School and seeing children that had been pulled out for vacation. And there was one child who was sitting in the back of the room and would not come and join the group. And the teacher said to me, because I think the teacher wanted me, she goes, this is what happens when they pull them out for a week to go on vacation. And the kid and I went back and circled back later with her, and she goes, it has been such a struggle to get him to re-engage. And I don't think that parents think about that. There was another one, the same thing. The child had to go back into intervention because the child had been pulled out. It's ridiculous how many times. So I do think it's worth, maybe that's an extreme, but if it causes someone to pause and think, like, is this the best thing to do? And what is you talk about social emotional component. What is that, when this is the unintended consequence?
The other piece of this conversation, and I agree with you, Melissa, when we were at the curriculum committee, I just dangled the carrot around the next generation accountability system now that it's back up and live again, because we took a pause on that 14 indicator reporting system. Now, I put in the chat, if you go on EdSite, all of these reports are public and they have a dashboard specific to chronic absenteeism. You asked about separating it out by school. You can look at historical data before COVID, and you can look at it, how it trends over the last couple years at each grade level and even at each school, and then as a district. I think to your point, Sharon, about other districts, I've been in this is my 4th district now. So in one of the districts when I worked, we specifically talked about the coding system, and you're absolutely right. That is why we unpacked some of this year around how we code these absences in Power School, right? And how the state is receiving that data. There were some inconsistencies throughout the district, although you can't compare it to other districts because their reporting, you don't know their reporting system, but it is a valid point because they should be following the law. But also looking at what data we're giving to the state to ensure that it is truly aligned to absenteeism, right? Like if you don't need to report this absence, but we have been because we're trying to uphold the law, and it's being counted against us, that's something that we needed to unpack a little bit further.
Right.
In addition, Weston's small. So like if you have 10 kids in a population and 2 of them have been chronically absent, that's already 20% right there. So that's the other flip side of the things that we battle with, right? And so we can say that our percentages are going up, but we have to unpack that percentage into number of kids.
Well,
So
all the
even-
more.
So if the ski team leaves and misses 2 classes, that's considered an absence? We have to report that as in this report to the state?
I got to go back and check that, because I think if they're here for the majority of the day, right, those 4 classes as we've defined, and they leave early, that's not considered an unexcused, it's not considered an absence because they were here for the majority of the day. And just like what we defined in here, if they aren't here if they're only here for 1 period and then they're out, then they don't get to participate in those activities. So to your question about that example, no, that wouldn't be the case. They were here.
Okay, so then they're just missing a couple of classes. It's not considered.
And they
an
have to make it up.
absentee.
Yes.
Okay.
We're talking if they've been
But if
absent
they go to,
4 classes in a day.
Okay.
but if they go play, and it doesn't have to be sports, it could be a group of children that we were honored last night. I mean, if they have to go play in a concert in Boston for the day or play in a tennis tournament, a state tennis tournament, is that considered an absence?
No, because they would, for the field trip, that's a field trip. That's an educationally supported opportunity that
Yeah.
they have gotten approval for. So no, we're talking
Okay.
about isolated incidents where the
Yeah,
parent
it-
making the decision and not aligned or connected to our work here.
Okay.
It's not school. It's not for going to state tournament. It's not for any of that. It's for, we're leaving early, or I'm going to get a driver's license, or, I want to get my kid out to beat the traffic to go skiing. It's that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay.
One other question for everybody on this is, if we do have a higher chronic absenteeism rate, what does that mean in the big picture?
And that's part of that intervention piece and that conversation piece, right? You're going to have some families that there really are good things happening, and they don't need an intervention to provide to the student, right? So it is critical, the intervention piece and the communication piece between the schools and the parents on the reasons why students are absent, and if there's patterns around absenteeism. So it's really hard to say. It's not black or white, right? These are individualized conversations that the building principals and the teams are having when the data increases up to 9 and 10.
Right. No, I guess what I'm saying is on a state level. So we
Yeah.
have to, the state tracks this and monitors this. Does this do anything as far as like our rating, as far as the school is concerned? Is there a negative impact for the school system to have a higher, higher truancy or higher, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, it is.
indicator 4 within the overall next gen accountability system. It does impact our overall score. I think it's good to have a big picture conversation, as Lisa said, in the beginning of the
Okay.
school year, once our updated data is there and out. And we've cleaned up some of these pieces under the hood. And we continuously have conversations with families about what that means for us, right? In the past, from what I understand, and Lisa, you were here, in the past, some of these policies really resulted in discipline, right? If you were absent from school for a certain number of days, then you couldn't pass the course. You failed the course. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, but quite frankly, that it sounds like we did that a lot and we didn't. What would happen was there used to be a committee. They would review. Did they do the work? There was a lot of what I would say bureaucracy around it. Quite frankly, when you're out that much, and if you're struggling, you're probably not going to pass the course because of that. It wasn't so much that we took credit away, and that's why we kind of made that change, because it just turned into almost a nightmare. Of
Yeah.
track and to validate absences. If you cut school, you get a consequence. But we don't have a lot of that. We don't have kids that just are like, I'm going off to the beach.
Well, I just
have it, but
yeah, I think that what we need to make sure we're doing in the meeting, either in September or October, is we need to be very clear why it matters. I mean, to the parents, why it matters, to the school district, and how that affects the school district negatively, which, impacts the parents negatively. And as far as if our schools are not highly rated for X, Y, and Z, that impacts our overall rating, which, that people move to Weston for the schools. So keep the schools up, make sure your kid goes to school, right? So I think we need to kind of bring it to the parents as to why it's important to them. Of course, classroom instruction, we know the importance of classroom instructions. Parents do too, but they're all like, well, I can pull my kid's smart and they can skip this class or whatever. But they have to understand that there's a negative impact for their action.
I think you're right, Sharon. I also just want to, I think you're absolutely right. I also just want to make sure I'm understanding properly, because I asked this earlier. Now I feel like I'm getting a slightly different answer. So when we're talking about absences from a specific class, like one class in a day, so they're not, a student is not considered absent for the entire day, right? They just missed one period. That does not trigger clearly the 9 to 10 day distinction in terms of the state for truancy regarding
Right, because they're present.
full day absences. But what about the chronic absenteeism statistics? Does it factor in because you may have a student who's missing a class or is partially absent repeatedly, but not triggering the 4 periods in a day? Is that recorded in a way that makes it into the next gen standards?
Good question.
If you are not present for 4 classes
In one day.
in one day,
Okay.
you are absent.
But what about if
about
it's just missing 2 classes?
What about the student that has, is just being pulled out at the end of the day at the middle school, or, in the high school rotating schedule, and it happens more frequently in the afternoons than in the mornings? I'm just trying to understand if this is a concern that we should be concerned about, or if it's,
It doesn't impact
get
the chronic
reported that way.
absenteeism number, but it does potentially create a different problem, to your point, if
Right.
the child leaves that same period,
Exactly.
let's say, in a consistent schedule, of which is tracked in Power School, of
Yeah.
which is documented and responded on an intervention level at the school level, but it's
Okay,
not
so-
part of the chronic absenteeism number.
Okay.
I hear what you're
that's-
saying. Yes.
Yeah, I got it.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
That's clear. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So
All right.
that's at the end of the regulations. We're there.
Yep.
Woohoo!
Yes. What you will see now in the appendix part, if that's the right word, I don't even know if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Are the documentation that we have revised and are now using as of, I think it was January we started using, or February. This is now an updated parent letter that is the same parent letter that we use throughout the district. And that is the one that is generated after after a conversation with parents and it accumulates the absences, and if the principals are feeling like there is an accumulation of absences, which may result in truancy and or chronic absenteeism. And this is the letter that they use.
You're talking about the letter that's on page 26 in our packet.
Sure.
Okay.
My number is 3, but that's clearly wrong.
Yes, it's 3 on the bottom of that.
Okay.
Okay. You know, I love this letter. I love communication. I think this is exactly what we need to be doing. I'm a little bit concerned about the second sentence, right? Because I think what we just spent some time talking about is educating parents to help emphasize the importance of attendance. So I don't know that we want to say, I recognize that you are doing everything you can do to limit your students' absences. We don't know that to be true.
We could say we hope.
Yeah.
So the district leadership, after multiple iterations and conversation, wants to approach this letter, especially after a verbal conversation. This letter will not be triggered unless there's a conversation with parents first. And that most of the time they are assuming good intentions.
Yeah.
And they want to ensure that this letter is also seen as a support, that we are in partnership with the parents and the families, and that we're here to support them, ensure that we are all trying to ensure that kids are coming to school on a regular basis and we're limiting the students' absences. That was a strong request from the committee.
I think you do that with the first sentence.
Mm-hmm.
The second one troubles me a little bit. Am I alone here, Sharon and Steve? I recognize that you are doing everything you can to limit your students' absences.
Yeah,
You know, what about?
I agree. We don't know. Generally, these are the people that do not do this.
Right.
I think that we need to rework the first 2 sentences, quite frankly, Tina.
Okay.
Even the appreciation. I don't know. I think that you begin with something like, quote from the policy, regular and consistent attendance is important.
We appreciate your engagement on this topic, on this
Yeah,
important
exactly.
topic.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, they're being too,
Being too nice.
well, it's not that type of letter. You know, you can use that language when they make the call. You know, we really appreciate your commitment. We need to count on you. But yeah. I am required to inform you, you know, in accordance with,
Not for nothing. This letter should scare them a little bit. I mean, this is like an alert letter. Like,
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you're trying to do, Tina, but at the same time,
yeah, I think we can just edit a couple of things.
yeah.
I mean, I think there's ways to emphasize the partnership in terms of their communication with you on this subject, their commitment going forward to following the policy. But I don't know. I don't know that we.
I mean, we could just take the first 2 sentences out and
Yeah,
start.
and I think I would start with regular and punctual student attendance at school is essential to the educational process. And then you might say something like, by this, in accordance with this, I must inform you.
Yes.
You know, I am required. I must inform you, you are, you know, to assist you. I mean, at the end, you can say, you know, we are here to help you. You know, if you need any assistance in this, but I would begin right with the.
Okay.
And the other thing too, in this, it says this data is collected by the state of Connecticut and is reflected in Weston's next generation accountability reporting system. I'm going to be honest, most people have no idea what the next generation accountability reporting system is.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily know if that, you can just say this data is collected by the state of Connecticut and is, you know, and Weston is held responsible for their numbers or something along those lines for our numbers.
Maybe what we do, and I'm sorry, I should have looked at this closer. Absenteeism guidelines are provided. That whole part of it could probably go at the very end. And then we could even put links in. And then you could also link the policy, you know?
Yeah, the policy is linked in here.
Is this going to be an electronic letter or a hard letter or both?
It's a electronic through PowerSchool.
I think, honestly, I think when we get to this level, it might not hurt to mail something home.
Yeah, how do you know it's received?
There's data on the back end to see that the person has received it and opened it.
Yeah, My guess is a lot of the people that are going to be receiving this letter are not really going to be engaged in their child's education
Okay.
and logging into PowerSchool. And that's a terrible generalization to make, but let's just cover our bases and make sure that they receive
Well,
a
I
hard
mean-
copy too.
I think a lot of lower school parents don't use PowerSchool at all because you're not really checking grades.
No, it
Right.
gets generated from PowerSchool to
Oh,
their
okay.
email. So they receive it in their inbox.
But again, I
Yeah,
mean,
but I hear you.
I would,
Mailed home too.
yeah, hopefully we don't have a lot of them, but I think that this is a serious enough issue that we need to mail it.
Okay.
Or maybe you send this one out on electronically on absence 5, and when it gets to absence 7, you send it out in a letter. So it's kind of
Both. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of, yeah. I would do
That's a
that.
good idea.
Okay.
Tina, you did a lot of work on this. I don't mean to like pile
it's
on.
good.
You've done a lot of
I'm
work on this.
laughing because, as you probably can expect, my first iteration was not with best intentions, but
You probably were working with them, but you had it like we had it.
yeah. So now I've got some backing, and this is good, and the board is supporting
I
a more
understand,
direct
yep.
letter. So this is great.
Okay.
Perfect. Love
Good.
it.
Well, I think this is great.
Yeah, me too.
It's
All
a
right, we'll
really
take
important
another.
topic.
We'll take another look and be a little more informative.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the district letter. I'm going to take that out so we can revise that. If you keep going, you'll see that the paper documentation that the Shipman and Goodwin provides as a documentation log is done digitally. We don't need
Yep.
to do a paper copy, or in Google, it's done through PowerSchool. We have the form letter for the extraordinary educational experience. It's the request form. It
Yep.
requires all the required signatures. We also have the school attendance option form if a child is under 7. So if we know who they are, they have to fill that out if they're not coming to school, the public school. And then we have the same for students age of 18.
Yep.
And then we have the for children up to age 17 for the attendance option. And I think that's the last form letter we now have in place.
When are they obligated to inform us that child's not going to be in school for whatever the reason is?
Yeah,
Free or
again,
public?
it's basically us communicating and keeping on top of the families. There's no like deadline, but before the students hit or after the students hit that age, then there's a form that we just need to make sure we know our kids. I don't see a timeline on these.
No,
Again,
but I mean,
Mhm.
child's out for 10 days.
Oh.
And turns out the child's out for an educational opportunity.
well, if it's an
Do we-
educational, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So when are we made aware of that's going to take place?
Well, if they're asking for an educational opportunity, it has to be 10 days before that happens. If the
Okay.
student is accumulating those excused absences, that letter is triggered, like I said, 5 days. But I would say that our principals, when there's chronic or a pattern that's like consecutive days of 3, 4, they're already on the phone calling them. These forms are not, it's kind of like these forms are in response after other interventions and communication has happened. Yeah. And when we had our curriculum committee meeting too, it's great to have our principals on the call because they really went into the nitty gritty of the scenarios that they're seeing in the schools. And I welcome that when we start talking about this further.
Yeah, I think school by school, you're dealing with incredibly different scenarios. So I
Yes.
think it would be a really useful conversation to have.
Yep.
It's just education for our parents and our community.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
and you know what? When we do that, I think Lisa, your story for parents with young children really
Yeah.
important. Having
That's-
those examples, because a lot of parents think, you know, you can take them out when they're little. It's when they're in high school that you can't really take them out for vacations, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well,
Exactly.
exactly. I was surprised, actually. I was like, oh my goodness. Now I see it. You know, to
Yeah.
see the child that distressed.
Yeah, yeah. So that should
Um,
be shared though with younger parents.
It should. And then Jody, pages of for these letters, 27, 20, the page letter on 27, 29, 35, I think all those letters, we just have a signature line for parent. I think we should make sure that that's parent or guardian, just to be,
Oh,
related to our
So
inclusive
when we
language.
update those, I'll add those.
Thank you.
I have to say, one of the things that struck me as strange during this document, but is throughout the entire document and is not going to be changed, was, and it's in the very, very beginning of the document where it says, Connecticut state law places responsibility for assuring that students attend school with the parent or other person having control of the child.
yes.
It just sounds so strange, but I understand as well. Throughout control of the child. I'm like, I don't know if I have control of my kids. I try, but
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else on this policy?
I think we're good.
How do you feel about bringing this forward for first read? I mean, we've made a few changes. Do you want to bring it back to the committee again at the beginning of the school year, or do you want it to go to first read in June?
I'd rather have it go in June.
Okay.
I think if we go first read in June and we have a final read in September, that opens the door for the conversation with the parents.
That's a great
Yeah.
idea.
But
Yeah, because then it'll be talked about twice. We can
Yeah.
have the conversation, and then when we talk about the policy, it'll be very clear why we're doing that.
And
Great.
it's timely for the second read at the very beginning of the school year.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Does that work out, Tina?
Yeah.
For you? Okay. And if
Absolutely.
there's anything you want to send to the committee or to send to me ahead of time, if you have a question or about anything that we discussed, let's, we can do that before it comes to the June meeting. If you have any questions.
Yeah, my only question, and I know I can just ask Lisa this, but how in depth are we reviewing at the board meeting? Like, are we going page by page?
No, I don't think we should go. I don't mean to speak for Lisa. Sorry. I would
no,
say
because we will never get out of it.
Exactly.
That's
so.
my
Let's
question.
just do the consolidation, what the
Okay.
policies were before, the fact that they're consolidated. So how many we went from to how many that we have now. And I think just high level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just be prepared for questions from board members who have had the opportunity to read it.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
make sure. Go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
I was going to say, we should encourage the board members to review it.
To read-
And if they have any questions, perhaps we can ask them to get the questions to us before a specific date so we can kind of help with the high level presentation. That's helpful then, because then they'll have another opportunity,
In September.
in September. But if we knew, for example, that these are 3 or 4 points that somebody needs clarification on, we can certainly weave that into when we review it. And or, I'm happy to call the person individually to explain because some of it is a little bit confusing. Tina and I could call them,
Yeah. The other piece is that June meeting is the 20th, which is also the closeout of the district improvement plan as well. Correct?
Yes, which, it's 90% closed out, right? We're going to present it, but I had
Yep.
said the other day that some of the scores are still embargoed. So that
Yes.
is a big item. And then this. So anything
Okay.
we can do ahead of it to get people
Right.
to review it and answer questions. We really can't wait till September because
Yeah.
this policy is so time sensitive. But we can do some work to move it quicker through the process.
Okay.
We'll also have 5112 on there also, correct? Okay, thank you.
And those will be the only attendance policies going
that's-
forward now, just 5112 and 5113.
Yeah, we have done a lot of work. I have to commend everybody on this committee
Yep.
for really being, this committee in particular at times was exhausting with the policy work. And this was huge what Tina did here. I mean, I
Yes.
can't thank you enough, Dr. Henkel, because this was not easy to pull it
It was
off.
fun.
We define fun very differently, Tina, but thank you.
Did you say fun?
It was fun.
Oh, it said it's fine. Okay,
It was
well,
fun.
hey, I got another one for you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we all appreciate the hard work.
Yeah.
And like I said, just reach out to me if you have any questions between now and the June meeting.
Thank
so
you.
We can make sure it goes forward.
Perfect.
Okay, anything else on the agenda? No.
Not on the agenda, but can you stay on just for a minute after? I want to talk
Yes.
about something else, and I want to make sure it gets on the.
There is,
So
yeah,
once-
there is something on the agenda about policy committee schedule for 23-24.
I had put that on there. I'm assuming that you want to try and keep these to the same schedule for next year. We'll look at all the dates and everything over the summer, but I figured I would add this in case there was any changes that somebody might
No,
want.
I appreciate that. I think the logical time to make changes are when committee structure changes, which will usually happen after the board elections in November. So I suspect this committee will stay the same at least through November. So
Okay.
let's start the school year off the same way.
Got it.
Okay,
Awesome.
thanks, Jody. All right, let's
good?
have, thank you, Dr. Henkel. Let's just have a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Okay, thanks,
Second.
Sharon. Thanks, Stephen. All right.
Have a good
meeting
day.
is adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording here.